I'll never forget the moment my daughter-in-law picked up the hand-stitched quilt I'd spent 9 months making for my son's first home, looked at it with those cold eyes of hers, and said loud enough for everyone at the Mother's Day brunch to hear, "Susan, honestly, did you really think we'd put this old-fashioned thing in our living room? We're going for a modern aesthetic." Then she folded it carelessly, shoved it back in the box, and slid it under the table with her foot like it was garbage. 9 months, 273 hours of hand-stitching, fabric squares cut from my late mother's dresses, my wedding dress, the blanket I brought my son Michael home from the hospital in. 4 generations of my family woven into that quilt, and she kicked it under a table at the lakeside restaurant in front of 32 people. I sat there in my chair, fork halfway to my mouth with that overpriced eggs. Benedict she'd insisted we order, and I just smiled. I smiled because that's what you do when you're 64 years old and you've learned that sometimes the best response to cruelty is silence. But inside, I was making calculations. My name is Susan Porter. I live in Seattle, Washington, in the house my late husband David and I bought in 1,987 inches, the Ballard neighborhood. David passed 4 years ago from a heart attack, left me with a paid-off house, a thriving catering business I'd built from scratch over 30 years, and substantial life insurance that put about $1.8 million in investments. I live modestly. I drive a 2015 Honda Accord. I shop at Trader Joe's. Most people who know me think I'm just a comfortable widow getting by on Social Security and catering gigs. My son Michael knows better. Or he should. He's 35, works as a project manager for a construction company, makes about $95,000 a year. Good money. Not rich, but comfortable for Seattle. He met Amber 3 years ago at a company networking event. She's 32, works in pharmaceutical sales, pulls in around $120,000 with commissions. On paper, they didn't need my money. But Amber had ideas. It started small, the way these things always do. Little comments about how quaint my house was. Questions about whether I'd thought about downsizing since I was all alone now. Suggestions that maybe I could help them with a down payment on a house, since Michael was your only child and David would have. Wanted him taken care of. I helped. I gave them $40,000 for their down payment on a townhouse in Fremont. I paid for half their wedding, $15,000 worth of flowers, and photography because Amber insisted she needed her day to be perfect. I smiled and wrote the checks because Michael seemed happy. And after losing David, my son's happiness was everything to me. Then Amber's mother, Patricia, moved to Seattle. Patricia was 60 years old, recently divorced for the 3rd time, and according to Amber's casual mentions, between opportunities, which I quickly learned meant unemployed and broke. Within 2 weeks of arriving from Sacramento, Patricia had somehow ended up staying in Michael and Amber's guest room temporarily. That was 7 months ago. The Mother's Day brunch was Amber's idea. She picked the lakeside, a trendy spot on Lake Union where brunch for our party of 6 would run close to $400. I offered to host at my house, make my famous quiche and cinnamon rolls, but Amber insisted. "We want to treat you, Susan. You deserve to be waited on." I should have known something was off when Amber seated me at the head of the table but positioned herself and Patricia on either side of me, with Michael at the far end next to Amber's younger sister, Kelsey, and Kelsey's boyfriend. Strategic positioning. I realized later they'd planned the whole thing. The quilt incident happened halfway through the meal. I'd brought it, wrapped in tissue paper, tied with a silk ribbon. I was so proud. I'd even included a small card explaining which pieces came from which family members. My grandmother's blue Sunday dress, my mother's favorite floral pattern, the yellow gingham from the curtains in Michael's childhood bedroom. Amber opened it, and I watched her face. Not a flicker of emotion, just that practiced smile she used with difficult clients. "How crafty," she said. And that's when she made the comment about it being old-fashioned and shoved it under the table. Patricia laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Amber's right. They're building such a gorgeous modern space. Very minimalist. Very now. This would look like something from a Pioneer Village exhibit." Michael opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his plate. That hurt worse than Amber's words. My son said nothing. I finished my eggs, Benedict. I complimented the hollandaise sauce. I asked Kelsey about her new job at the marketing firm. I thanked everyone for the lovely brunch, and when we left, I hugged Michael and told him I loved him. I did not mention the quilt he left under that table. The next morning, Monday, I called my attorney, Robert Chen, who'd handled David's estate. Robert, I said, I need to review my will and some financial documents. Can you fit me in this week? Of course, Susan. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, I told him. Just time to make sure my affairs are in proper order. I also called my accountant, Michelle Torres, and asked her to pull together a complete summary of my assets, my business valuations, and my projected retirement income. Then I called my real estate agent, Karen White, and asked her to give me a current market analysis on my house. Just information gathering. Just due diligence. That Wednesday, Michael called. Mom, Amber feels terrible about the quilt. She said she didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Then why didn't she call me herself? I asked. Silence. Then, she's been really stressed with work, and having her mum stay with us has been an adjustment. I understand, I said. And I did. I understood perfectly. Maybe you could come over for dinner Friday? Amber wants to apologize properly. I accepted because I needed to see them. I needed to confirm what I suspected. Friday dinner was at their townhouse, a nice 3-bedroom place in Fremont they'd bought for $675,000, with my $40,000 helping make up their down payment. I brought a homemade lasagna and a salad. Patricia answered the door. Susan, come in, come in. Amber's just finishing up some work emails. You know how it is with her job. Patricia was wearing yoga pants and a designer sweatshirt I recognized from Nordstrom's website. $180. I'd looked at it online last month and decided it was too expensive. The townhouse smelled like takeout Thai food, not the home-cooked meal Michael had promised. I found Amber in the kitchen, still in her work clothes, scrolling through her phone. Susan, hi, she said, barely looking up. Thanks for bringing dinner. I've been slammed all week. We're just going to eat your lasagna. I hope that's okay. Of course, I said. Over dinner, Patricia dominated the conversation, talking about a business opportunity she was exploring, some multi-level marketing thing involving wellness products. Michael looked exhausted. Amber kept checking her phone. Finally, as I was serving my homemade tiramisu, Amber cleared her throat. Susan, about the quilt. I'm sorry if I seemed ungrateful. It's just, our design aesthetic is very specific, and we've hired an interior designer who has a whole vision for the space. An interior designer, I repeated. Yes, she's amazing. Works with all the tech executives in Capitol Hill. She's going to transform this place. We're budgeting about $45,000 for the redesign. I kept my face neutral. That sounds lovely. The thing is, Amber continued, and here it came, I could feel it building. We're a bit stretched with the designer costs, and Patricia's staying with us. She's helping with rent, of course, but it's still tight. We were wondering if you might be willing to help us out. Just $15,000 or so to cover the designer's first phase. Michael's fork clattered on his plate. Amber, we talked about this. We agreed we weren't going to ask my mum for money. I'm not asking for money, Amber said smoothly. I'm asking for an investment in your childhood home's legacy. Some of those beautiful things Susan has could be sold, and she could use that money to help us create a space worthy of her future grandchildren. My future grandchildren, the ones that didn't exist yet. She was already spending their inheritance. What things? I asked quietly. Patricia jumped in. Well, that old jewelry you must have. David was successful, wasn't he? You must have some nice pieces. And that house in Ballard? It must be worth, what, $900,000 now? You could downsize to a nice condo, help Michael and Amber upgrade to a real house, something in Magnolia or Queen Anne. I looked at my son. He was staring at his plate, his neck red, the way it got when he was a boy and knew he'd done something wrong. Michael, I said, did you tell them to ask me this? No. His voice was quiet. But Amber's right that we're stretched thin financially. Then perhaps, I said, standing up and gathering my empty lasagna pan, you should reconsider the $45,000 interior designer and the fact that your mother-in-law has been living rent-free in your guest room for 7 months. I left. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply left. The next morning, Saturday, I called Robert Chen at home. Robert, I need you to draft some documents for me, and I need you to do it quickly. What I did over the next 2 weeks was this. I had Robert create an irrevocable trust for the bulk of my estate, with very specific terms. Michael would inherit, but not until he was 50 years old, and only if he met certain conditions, including financial counseling and maintaining a relationship with me that didn't involve him or his spouse asking for money. The trust was set up so that if Michael divorced, his spouse would get nothing from my estate. Everything was protected. I contacted a financial advisor and moved my liquid assets into accounts that were harder to access on a whim, with withdrawal rules that would flag any attempts to make large transfers. I had Karen do a full market analysis on my house. It was worth $1.2 million, actually. I had her put together paperwork to put the house in the trust as well. And then I did something else. I called the catering company that had approached me 6 months ago about buying my business. They'd offered $850,000 for the client list, the name, the equipment, everything. I'd turned them down because I liked working. But now, I accepted their offer with one condition. I would stay on as a consultant for 3 years at $60,000 per year, and they would keep my staff. They agreed. I sold my business. I put that money in the trust too. Then, and only then, I called Michael and asked him to meet me for coffee. Just the two of us. We met at a cafe in Ballard on a Thursday morning. He looked nervous, kept stirring his coffee even though he drank it black. Mom, about dinner last week. Amber feels terrible. So does Patricia. Michael, I said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. I told him about the trust, about the business sale, about the conditions of his inheritance. I watched his face go pale, then red, then pale again. You're cutting me out of your will because Amber asked for money. I'm not cutting you out. I'm protecting you. And more importantly, I'm protecting myself. Your father and I worked 40 years to build what we had. I'm not going to spend my retirement being treated like an ATM machine while watching someone with a $120,000 salary cry poverty because she wants a $45,000 interior designer. That's not fair. Isn't it, Michael? That quilt I made you. Do you know where it is right now? He looked down. Amber donated it. The words hit me like a slap, even though I'd suspected she donated it. To Goodwill. She said someone else might appreciate it more. Mum, I'm sorry, I should have stopped her, but we'd had this huge fight about money and her mum, and You just let her donate a quilt made from your grandmother's dresses, your mother's wedding dress, the blanket you came home from the hospital in. He started to cry. My 35-year-old son sat in that coffee shop and cried. I don't know what happened, he said. When did I become this person who doesn't stand up for you? I don't know either, I told him. But I know I'm not going to enable it anymore. You make $95,000 a year. Amber makes $120,000. Together, that's $215,000. That's more than your father and I made combined for the first 20 years of our marriage. And we had a child and a mortgage. If you can't live on that, it's not a money problem. It's a priority problem. What do I do? That's up to you, I said. But I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to travel. I'm going to take art classes. I'm going to spend time with my friends. And I'm going to be here for you when you decide you want a relationship with me that isn't about my bank account. I left him sitting there. 3 days later, Amber called me. I let it go to voicemail. She called again, and again. On the 4th call, I answered. Susan, Michael told me what you did with your estate. That's incredibly manipulative. I'm protecting my assets, I said calmly. We're family. You're supposed to help family. I did help family. I gave you $40,000 for a down payment. I paid $15,000 for your wedding. I've hosted every holiday dinner for the last 3 years. I made your husband a quilt that represented 4 generations of love, and you donated it to Goodwill. That was a mistake, No, Amber. It was a choice. Just like my choices, now about my money are my choices. You and Michael make $215,000 a year. If you can't live on that, that's between you and him. You're a selfish, bitter old woman, she hissed. I'm a woman who knows her worth, I said, and hung up. Patricia called next, screaming about family loyalty and how I was ruining her daughter's life. I blocked her number. Michael didn't call for 2 weeks. When he finally did, his voice sounded different, older. Mom, can I come over? He came on a Sunday afternoon. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework as a boy, and he told me everything. How Amber had been pressuring him to ask me for money for months. How Patricia had convinced Amber that I was sitting on a fortune I was selfishly hoarding. How he'd been so desperate to keep his marriage happy that he'd gone along with it all, even when it made him sick to his stomach. I asked Amber to go to counseling with me, he said. She refused. She said if I really loved her, I'd convince you to change your mind about the trust. And what did you say? I said no. He looked up at me, and I saw my son again. Really saw him. I said no, and I told her that if she couldn't accept that my relationship with my mother wasn't about money, then maybe we needed to reconsider our relationship. How did she respond? She moved out. She's staying with her mum at some extended stay hotel in Bellevue. She maxed out our joint credit card before she left. About $8,000 worth of charges. Furniture I never saw. Clothes. Designer bags. I reached across the table and took his hand. I'm so sorry, honey. Don't be. I'm the one who should apologize. I let her treat you terribly. I let her disrespect everything you did for us. That quilt. His voice broke. Mom, I went to 6 different Goodwills looking for it. I couldn't find it. I know, I said softly. I already looked. We sat there in silence for a while. Then Michael said, I'm going to file for divorce. I've already talked to a lawyer. With the prenup we signed and the separate finances we maintained, it should be relatively clean. I'll lose some money, but not everything. What about Patricia? He laughed, a bitter sound. She moved with Amber. Turns out the business opportunity was a scam, and she owes about $12,000 in credit card debt from buying inventory she can't sell. She was hoping I'd pay it off. When I said no, she left too. I'm sorry your marriage ended this way. I'm not, he said. I'm sorry I was so blind. I'm sorry I hurt you, but I'm not sorry it's ending. I married someone I didn't really know, and when I started to see who she really was, I made excuses instead of facing reality. Over the next few months, I watched my son rebuild his life. He sold the townhouse, split the proceeds with Amber as the divorce settlement required, and moved into a smaller apartment in Fremont. He started going to therapy. He started visiting me every Sunday for dinner, and we'd cook together, just like when he was young. One Sunday, about 6 months after that Mother's Day brunch, he showed up at my door carrying something large wrapped in brown paper. What's this? I asked. Open it. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a quilt. Not my quilt, but a new one. He'd worked with a quilter in Ballard, a woman named Sarah, who specialized in memory quilts. This one had squares from David's favorite flannel shirts, from Michael's high school letter jacket, from the curtains that had hung in his childhood room. And in the center, Sarah had embroidered in careful script, to Mum, who taught me that love isn't measured in dollars, but in stitches. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember. Love, Michael. I cried. I held that quilt and cried while my son hugged me. I can't replace what Amber threw away, he said. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what you were trying to give me. Not just fabric and thread, but history. Family. Love that lasts longer than trends or designer furniture. I hung that quilt in my living room. It's still there, almost 2 years later. Michael met someone new last year. Her name is Jennifer. She's a high school teacher. And the first time I met her, she brought me a small potted plant and said, Michael told me about his mother who knows the difference between price and value. I hope we can be friends. They're taking it slow. She's met me 4 times now, always in casual settings, always with Michael there but not hovering. She's never asked me about money. She's asked about David, about what Michael was like as a boy, about my catering business, and why I loved it. Last month, Michael called to ask if they could both come to Sunday dinner. When they arrived, Jennifer handed me something wrapped in tissue paper. "I heard about the quilt," she said quietly. "I can't replace it, but I thought you might like this." It was a small quilted wall hanging, maybe 2 feet square. Jennifer had made it herself, she explained. It showed a house that looked remarkably like mine, with a tree in the yard and flowers in the window boxes. At the bottom, she'd stitched, "Home is where your story begins." "I used fabric from some of my grandmother's old dresses," she said. "I hope that's okay." Michael told me about the tradition, and I thought if maybe someday I'm part of this family, I'd like to contribute to that tradition. I hugged her. This woman who understood that you don't buy your way into a family, you stitch yourself in with patience and respect and time. My estate is still in the trust. Michael will inherit when he's 50, and based on the way he's managing his own finances now, attending counseling, building a life based on what matters rather than what impresses, I think he'll be ready for it. But more than that, I think he won't need it the way he thought he did. Sometimes I think about that Mother's Day brunch, about Amber shoving my quilt under the table, about Patricia laughing. I could be bitter. Part of me wants to be. But mostly, I'm grateful. Grateful that I saw clearly enough to protect myself. Grateful that the pain of that moment led to months of difficult but necessary conversations with my son. Grateful that Michael found the courage to choose respect over comfort, truth over keeping the peace. And I'm grateful for Sunday dinners, for second chances, for women like Jennifer who understand that the best things in life aren't purchased. They're created stitch by careful stitch. Last Sunday, Jennifer asked if I'd teach her to make a quilt. "A real one," she said, "big enough for a bed. I want to learn how to do it right," she told me. "The traditional way, the way you learned from your mother." So next week, we're starting. I've already pulled out fabric from old dresses, from David's shirts I've kept in the attic, from the baby blankets I saved from when Michael was born. We'll sit at my kitchen table, and I'll teach her the stitches my mother taught me and her mother taught her. And maybe someday, when I'm gone, Michael will wrap himself in a quilt made by 3 generations of women who loved him, and he'll remember, not the money, not the house, not the things that can be bought and sold. He'll remember that love is measured in hours and stitches and patience. That family isn't about what you inherit, but what you choose to carry forward. And that will be worth more than any trust fund, any estate, any amount of money I could ever leave behind. That's the real inheritance, the one that can't be donated to Goodwill or shoved under a table, the one that lasts.